Croatia's GDP fell for the fifth consecutive year. Now, this is the longest recession since the country emerged from war in 1995. I'm joined by Abbas Ameli-Renani, an emerging market strategist at RBS in London. So Abbas, the country clearly needs to implement a series of reforms in order for some sort of recovery. But do you see this happening?
Croatia's in a very difficult spot at the moment. We're seeing pretty much every single one of Croatia's regional peers not just come out of recession, but come bouncing back with very strong and healthy economic growth, in most part driven by exports. The back end of 2013 and 2014 will be the years in which Central and Eastern European region will, for the first time since the financial crisis, benefit from its exposure to the Eurozone, in large part driven by rising domestic demand in major Eurozone economies. Now, Croatia, unfortunately, for the past few years has struggled with gaining competitiveness. Indicators have fallen quite considerably in Croatia, and we've seen the economy lose market share in terms of exports to the Eurozone. So they haven't been able to benefit on that front. Lending conditions remain tight still, so we're not seeing much of a contribution from private consumption either. Now, the government really needs to get its act together very soon, implement especially labor market reforms. We need to see increased labor market flexibility, and perhaps most importantly, a much more benign environment for foreign investments. Really, Croatia hasn't been benefiting much from any major investments from abroad. For example, we've seen that in Serbia, a simple one single large ticket investment by Fiat can really turn the economy around. We're not seeing any similar dynamics in Croatia, unfortunately, at the moment.
Croatia is facing increasing borrowing costs after public debt reached 64% of economic output last year. So Abbas, can you tell us more about this major challenge?
Yeah, on the debt side, what is worrying is that we're not seeing any improvements in debt dynamics in Croatia. If you look at interest payments on Croatia's debt relative to its growth rate, it is by far the worst in Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa. And really, you either need to lower your borrowing costs or you need to generate growth. Otherwise, when you have both of these, you're in a vicious cycle whereby your debt to GDP will continue rising over time. Now, in the case of Croatia, what we need to start seeing is structural reform so that some growth can be generated, but we need to start seeing much better fiscal prudence as well. Forget about the growth side. Fiscal management in Croatia, unfortunately, over the past few years has been quite poor. Again, compared to peers in Croatia's regional neighbors, we have seen a serious concerted effort to reduce public expenditure, tighten the budget deficit. We've seen significant nominal wage cuts in countries like Romania, for example. In Croatia, we haven't seen much of that. So far, the government's attempts at fiscal consolidation have mostly been focused on the revenue side, largely based on extremely optimistic growth assumptions. So, for example, last year, they were forecasting about a 1% growth to achieve their budget deficit target. Of course, that didn't happen, and we saw further deterioration on the fiscal side. So over the next few weeks, I expect to see already a budget review for 2014, which just tells you how poor the budget was drafted in the first place for the year, that only 3 months in, they're having to redraft the budget. But my hope is that it will be based on more reasonable growth assumptions. But also, I think the one area where we could see a bit of positive change in Croatia is the country's membership of the European Union. Not for anything in terms of investment, etc., but perhaps because Croatia is now part of the excessive deficit procedure. My hope is that this will provide some sort of a fiscal anchor for Croatia's budgetary performance. Other countries in the region have gone under IMF programs. For example, Romania, Serbia is now trying very hard to get one. Croatia hasn't gone down that route, but hopefully now that it's in the excessive deficit procedure, we could see a more concerted effort by the government to try and narrow the budget deficit.
The Minister of Tourism said direct investment in the Croatian tourism sector for renovation and construction of accommodation facilities is actually expected to rise to €410 million. Croatia's tourism sector is the only one not suffering from the economic crisis. It had about 12 million foreign tourists last year. But why is the country not benefiting enough from this? And is the sector causing any imbalances to the economy?
Yeah, unfortunately, I actually think from an economic growth perspective, tourism hasn't been so great for Croatia because, yes, it generates a lot of growth and it's the only growth-generating sector in the economy, But what it has meant has been that the rest of the economy has been in large part neglected by government officials. There is simply too much pressure on the tourism industry to carry the entire economy with it on its own. And also tourism is a very seasonal industry, and it creates its own economic imbalances over different time periods. At different seasons, we'll see spikes in unemployment rates and then subsequent falls. It makes it very difficult for households to reasonably plan consumption, for businesses not in the tourism industry to benefit on a sustainable basis from it. So yes, it's good that we're going to see increased investment in the tourism industry, and tourism is of course a very important element of Croatia's economy, but the government really needs to start focusing on other sectors to generate sustainable growth.
Abbas, thank you very much. Well, viewers, do stay tuned as we have plenty more economic updates coming your way.